They say blood is thicker than water, but when that blood turns poisonous, sometimes you have to cut it out to survive. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. For 43 years I raised a family, built a life, and trusted the people who shared my DNA. I never imagined that my own children would commit fraud in my name, steal my life savings, and then point their fingers at me when the FBI came knocking. This is the story of how my family's greed destroyed everything we'd built, and how I fought back to reclaim, not just my money, but my dignity. I wasn't born rich, but my late husband, Robert, and I worked hard for everything we had. He was a union electrician for 38 years, and I managed the books for a small accounting firm until I retired. We saved every penny, lived below our means, and by the time Robert passed 3 years ago, we'd accumulated what I considered a comfortable nest egg, about $340,000 between savings, investments, and life insurance. Robert always said, "Maggie, make sure the kids are taken care of, but don't let them take advantage of you." How prophetic those words would become after his funeral. My 3 adult children, David, Susan, and Michael, suddenly became very interested in my financial well-being. David, my eldest at 48, worked in insurance sales, but always seemed to be struggling with money. Susan, 45, had recently gone through an expensive divorce, and Michael, my youngest at 42, had been laid off from his manufacturing job 6 months earlier. I should have seen the warning signs earlier growing up. These 3 had been thick as thieves when it came to getting what they wanted. There was the time they convinced me that all the neighborhood kids got $50 allowances when they were teenagers, or when they pooled their resources to manipulate Robert into buying them a gaming console by having each one ask him separately, making it seem like an independent decision. But this was different. This wasn't about video games or extra spending money. This was about my entire life's work, and they were treating it like their inheritance was already guaranteed. The visits became more frequent after Robert's death. Every Sunday dinner turned into a financial planning session. David would arrive with investment brochures. Susan brought articles about elder care and cognitive decline prevention. Michael started asking detailed questions about my daily routines, my medications, even my driving habits. "Mom, maybe you should consider moving somewhere smaller," Susan suggested one evening while we were doing dishes. "This house is getting too much for you to handle." I dried a plate slowly, thinking about her words. "I've lived in this house for 32 years, Susan. Your father and I raised you children here. Why would I want to leave now?" "Well, the maintenance costs alone must be enormous, and if something happened to you, we'd have to deal with selling it anyway. Wouldn't it be easier to liquidate now while you can oversee the process?" Liquidate. That word sent a chill through me. She was talking about my home like it was a stock portfolio. "Mom, you really should let us help you manage your finances," David said during one of our monthly dinners. "At your age, it's easy to make mistakes. I've been managing money since before you were born," I replied. But I could see the look that passed between them, the same look they'd shared as teenagers when they were planning something I wouldn't approve of. Susan chimed in with false sweetness. "We just worry about you being taken advantage of by scammers or making poor investment choices. That's when I should have known. When your own children start treating you like you're senile before you've even shown signs of decline, they're not protecting you. They're positioning themselves." The pressure intensified over the following months. David started bringing financial advisors to family gatherings. Always young men in expensive suits who spoke in jargon and seemed more interested in my asset allocation than my well-being. Susan began leaving pamphlets about simplified banking and streamlined estate planning. On my kitchen counter, Michael, always the tech-savvy one, offered repeatedly to update my online banking and organize my digital files. "Mom, you really need to get with the times," Michael said, hovering over my shoulder as I balanced my checkbook the old-fashioned way. "Everything's digital now. Paper statements are so inefficient." "I like seeing my transactions written down," I told him. "It helps me keep track. But what if something happened to you? How would we access your accounts to pay your bills or handle emergencies?" There it was again. That presumption that I was one step away from incapacity. That my children needed to be ready to swoop in and take control of my life at a moment's notice. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. I'd spent all day cooking. Turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, Robert's favorite pecan pie. The whole family was there, including my 2 grandchildren from Susan's first marriage. As we sat around the table, David cleared his throat in that formal way that meant he had something important to say. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time for you to consider some changes to your financial arrangements." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Well, for starters, you should add our names to your bank accounts. That way, if anything happens, we can help manage things without having to go through legal complications." Susan nodded, earnestly. "And we think you should consolidate your investments. David knows a broker who specializes in retirement portfolios for seniors," Michael jumped in. "Plus, you should really consider a reverse mortgage on the house. You could access the equity now and still live here." I set down my fork and looked around the table at these 3 people I'd raised from infancy. My grandchildren were quietly eating, unaware that their parents and uncle were systematically trying to dismantle their grandmother's financial independence. "Let me understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You want me to give you access to my bank accounts, let David's friend manage my investments, and take out a loan against the house your father and I paid off 15 years ago." "It's not a loan, Mom," Michael corrected. "It's a financial tool that would give you more liquidity." "I have plenty of liquidity," I said. "What I don't have is a reason to change a system that's worked perfectly well for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, David spoke up. "Mom, we're just trying to help you be realistic about your situation. You're not getting any younger, and these decisions are only going to get harder as time goes on." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in Robert's recliner and thought about what had just happened. My children weren't offering to help me. They were positioning themselves to control me. The worst part was how methodical it all seemed, how they'd clearly coordinated their approach. I should have stood my ground right then. I should have told them that my finances were my business and would remain so until I decided otherwise. Instead, I made the mistake that would nearly cost me everything. I tried to compromise. The first sign something was wrong came in a phone. Call from my bank's fraud department. "Mrs. Thompson, we're calling about some unusual activity on your accounts. Have you recently authorized any large transfers or investment purchases?" My blood ran cold. "What kind of transfers?" "It appears someone has been moving significant amounts from your savings into a high-risk cryptocurrency investment account. The total so far is approximately $180,000. I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't even know what cryptocurrency was, let alone how to invest in it. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "The transactions were authorized using your social security number and account information. Do you have those details written down anywhere? Or have you shared them with anyone?" That's when the pieces started falling into place. 6 months earlier, David had convinced me to give him my account information. Just for emergencies. He'd said it was important for the family to have access in case something happened to me. The investigation that followed was a nightmare. Bank officials treated me with barely concealed suspicion, as if I were either a criminal mastermind or a confused old woman who couldn't remember her own financial transactions. The cryptocurrency trail led to multiple overseas accounts and shell companies with names like Digital Future Investments and Global Crypto Holdings. But what truly broke my heart was discovering how long this had been planned. The bank's forensic accountant showed me a timeline of suspicious activity going back 8 months, right after Robert's funeral, when I was grieving and vulnerable. Mrs. Thompson, we've identified at least 15 separate transactions that appear to be unauthorized, the investigator explained. Someone with access to your personal information has been systematically moving money through various cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore accounts. How much? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. So far, approximately $220,000. And it's not just theft. Whoever did this also used your identity to defraud other elderly investors. We've identified at least 6 other victims who lost money to fake investment schemes set up using variations of your name and social security number. The room seemed to spin. Not only had someone stolen most of my life savings, but they'd used my identity to victimize other people my age. Somewhere out there were other grandmothers and grandfathers who'd lost their nest eggs because someone had used my name to scam them. There's something else, the investigator said gently. We've been in contact with your son David. He contacted us several weeks ago to express concerns about your mental state and your handling of your finances. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just stolen from me. He'd laid the groundwork to make it look like I was either complicit or incompetent. Over the next few days, I began to see how carefully they'd orchestrated everything. Susan had been documenting my forgetfulness and confusion in emails to her brothers, creating a paper trail of concern about my mental capacity. Michael had been researching elder law and guardianship procedures, presumably preparing for the day when they'd need to have me declared incompetent. They'd even consulted with an attorney about having me evaluated for dementia. Not because they were genuinely worried about my health, but because they needed legal justification for taking control of my assets. The cruelest part was how they'd used my trust against me. Every piece of information I'd shared with them, my social security number, my account details, my daily routines, had been weaponized in their scheme. They'd studied my habits so they could make transactions when I wouldn't notice, during my weekly church services or my bridge club meetings. 3 weeks later, 2 FBI agents knocked on my door. Mrs. Thompson, we're investigating a case of wire fraud and money laundering involving accounts registered under your name and social security number. They explained that someone had been using my identity to set up fake investment schemes, not just stealing from my accounts, but also defrauding other elderly investors out of nearly $500,000. The trail led back to sophisticated cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts, all apparently orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of my personal information. We'll need you to come in for questioning, the younger agent said. You're currently considered a person of interest. Person of interest. Those words hit me like a physical blow. After 72 years of paying my taxes, following the law, and raising my children to do the same, I was being investigated as a criminal. The interrogation was humiliating. They questioned me for 6 hours, going over every detail of my financial life, my relationships with my children, my daily routines. They asked about my medications, my mental health, whether I'd ever been treated for dementia or Alzheimer's. Mrs. Thompson, we need you to understand the seriousness of these charges, Detective Rivera said, leaning across the metal table. Wire, fraud, and money laundering are federal crimes. If convicted, you could be looking at 20 to 30 years in prison. 20 to 30 years. At my age, that was essentially a life sentence. I want a lawyer, I said, my voice barely above her. Whisper, that's your right, the detective replied. But cooperation at this stage could be very beneficial for your case. If you were coerced or manipulated by someone else, now is the time to tell us. The betrayal cut even deeper when I learned who had pointed the FBI in my direction. Your son. David contacted us, the detective explained during my interrogation. He expressed concern that you might be involved in financial crimes and said the family had noticed erratic behavior and poor decision-making on your part. David, my firstborn, the one I'd stayed up all night with when he had pneumonia as a baby, the one I'd co-signed student loans for, helped with his first house down payment, and supported through 2 career changes. But it wasn't just David. As the investigation continued, I learned that all 3 of my children had given statements to the FBI, each one painting me as a confused, elderly woman who'd gotten involved in something beyond her understanding, or as a cunning criminal who'd used her age as a cover for financial fraud. Susan had told investigators that I'd been acting strange since Robert's death, making impulsive financial decisions and becoming secretive about money. She'd even provided them with copies of emails where she'd expressed concern to her brothers about my mental state. Michael had given them detailed information about my computer usage, claiming I'd been obsessed with financial websites and had asked him repeatedly to help me set up online trading accounts. They'd built a comprehensive case against me, using their intimate knowledge of my life to create a narrative that was both plausible and devastating. Either I was a victim of my own declining mental capacity, or I was a criminal who'd exploited other elderly people's trust. The worst part was realizing how long they'd been planning this. The financial investigator showed me evidence that the cryptocurrency accounts had been set up months before any money was stolen, which meant my children had been planning to frame me from the very beginning. This wasn't opportunistic theft, the investigator explained. This was a sophisticated, long-term plan. Whoever did this spent months establishing the infrastructure, creating the false identity documents, and setting up the offshore accounts. And they had help. We're looking at least 3 people working together. As I sat in that sterile interrogation room, I realized the full scope of what my children had done to me. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen my identity, my reputation, and my freedom. They'd turned me from their mother into their scapegoat, and they'd done it with the cold calculation of strangers. As the investigation continued, the full scope of their scheme emerged. David, Susan, and Michael had been planning this for months. They'd systematically gathered my personal information, created false documents using my identity, and established an elaborate network of fake investment accounts. When their scheme started to unravel, they needed a scapegoat. Who better than their elderly mother with declining mental capacity? They had counted on me being too old, too confused, or too scared to fight back. They thought I would simply accept whatever fate they'd arranged for me. Maybe even feel grateful that they were handling the situation. They were wrong. What my children didn't know was that their father had taught me to keep meticulous records of everything. Every transaction, every phone call, every piece of mail. I documented it all. It was a habit Robert had instilled in me during his union days, when he'd learned that paperwork could save your job or your pension. always keep receipts, Maggie. He'd say, "Paper doesn't lie, but people do." While the FBI was building their case and my children were probably celebrating their clever scheme, I was in Robert's old home office, going through 3 years' worth of financial records with a fine-tooth comb. What I found was more damning than I could have imagined. In my phone records, I discovered that David had made 17 calls to cryptocurrency exchanges using my landline while he was supposedly helping me organize my affairs. The calls were always made during specific windows. When I was at church on Wednesday evenings or at my weekly doctor's appointments, Susan had used my computer to research offshore banking while she was updating my software. But what she didn't know was that Robert had set up the computer to keep detailed logs of every website visited and every file downloaded. The evidence was all there. Research into money laundering laws, instructions for setting up shell companies, even tutorials on how to create false identity documents. Michael had been photographing my important documents during family visits, claiming he was helping digitize everything for safekeeping. But I found the evidence on his phone, which he'd connected to my Wi-Fi network to upload the photos. My router kept logs of every device that connected to it, and I could see exactly what files had been transferred and when. But the most damning evidence was something none of them knew about: the security cameras. After a break-in 3 houses down the previous year, Robert and I had installed a discreet security system. The cameras weren't obvious, just small devices, hidden in our outdoor light fixtures and one inside the house that looked like a smoke detector. Robert had been paranoid about home invasions targeting elderly people, so he documented everything. Those cameras had recorded my children's visits. For over a year, I watched hours of footage showing David going through my mail when I was in the bathroom, Susan taking photos of my financial statements when she thought I was napping, Michael copying information from my address book and calendar. Most importantly, I had audio recordings of their conversations when they thought I couldn't hear them. The cameras had sensitive microphones, and I'd recorded them planning their scheme during family dinners, discussing how to make me appear incompetent, even joking about how easy it would be to manage Mom's money better than she ever could. In one particularly chilling recording from last Christmas, I heard Susan say, "Once we get power of attorney, we can move everything into better investments. She'll never even know the difference." Fid's voice was clear on the recording. "And if she starts asking questions, we just get her declared incompetent. I've already talked to a lawyer about the process." Michael's response made my blood run cold. The beauty of this plan is that even if she figures it out, who's going to believe a confused old lady over her 3 loving children? They had underestimated me completely. They saw an elderly widow and assumed I was helpless, confused, and easily manipulated. They never considered that the woman who had managed a household budget for 43 years and helped raise 3 children might be smarter than they gave her credit for. Most damning of all, I found the life insurance policy Robert had taken out that none of my children knew about. A separate policy worth $200,000 that would only pay out if my death was ruled natural or accidental, not suicide or criminal activity. But there was more. Hidden in Robert's files, I discovered that he'd suspected something was wrong before he died. He'd written a letter, sealed and dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack, detailing his concerns about our children's sudden interest in our finances. Maggie. The letter read, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering why the kids are acting strange about money. I've been watching them, and I don't like what I see. David asked me about our life insurance policies 3 times last month. Susan's been asking detailed questions about our investment accounts. Michael wanted to know about our wills, and when we last updated them. I hope I'm wrong, but I think they're planning something. I've documented everything in the file marked insurance. Dates, conversations, everything, if something happens to you after I'm gone. Make sure someone looks at those records. I love you, and I trust you to do what's right. Robert. Reading Robert's letter, I felt a mixture of grief and vindication. He'd seen what I'd missed, or what I'd refused to. See, our children weren't concerned about our well-being. They were concerned about their inheritance. The next morning, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I hired the best criminal defense attorney in the state, Mrs. Thompson. Attorney Patricia Valdez said during our first meeting, "Your children have built a compelling case against you. The FBI is taking their accusations seriously. This isn't just about the money. They're alleging that you used your age and apparent confusion to gain other people's trust before defrauding them. We're going to have to prove not only that you're innocent, but that they're the real criminals." "Then that's what we'll do," I said, pulling out 3 boxes of evidence I'd organized. "I have documentation going back 2 years showing exactly how they planned and executed this scheme." Patricia's eyes widened as she looked through my files. "Mrs. Thompson, this is comprehensive. Audio recordings, video footage, computer logs, phone records. How did you manage to collect all this?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "My husband was a union man. He taught me that when someone's trying to screw you over, you better have proof." The preliminary hearing was supposed to be a formality, a chance for the prosecution to present their case and for me to enter a plea. My children sat in the gallery, playing their parts as the concerned family members dealing with their criminal mother. David even dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief when the prosecutor described the elaborate fraud scheme orchestrated by the defendant. Patricia stood up for my defense, and what happened next was something none of us expected. "Your Honor, my client is not just innocent of these charges. She's the victim of an elaborate conspiracy orchestrated by her own children. We have evidence that David Susan and Michael Thompson systematically defrauded their mother and multiple other victims, then attempted to frame Mrs. Thompson when their scheme began to unravel." The prosecutor looked confused. "Your Honor, we have no evidence suggesting. We have phone records showing Mr. David Thompson made 17 calls to cryptocurrency exchanges from his mother's phone line." Patricia continued. "We have computer logs showing Ms. Susan Thompson researched offshore banking from her mother's computer. We have photographs taken by Michael Thompson of sensitive financial documents. Most importantly, we have bank surveillance footage showing all 3 defendants making transactions using their mother's accounts while she was at her weekly church service." The courtroom was silent. I watched my children's faces as the weight of Patricia's words sank in. David had gone pale. Susan was gripping the bench in front of her. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. "Furthermore," Patricia said, "we have evidence that the defendants took out a life insurance policy on their mother, creating a financial incentive for her incarceration or death." The judge called for a recess, and during the break I watched my children huddled with their own lawyer, their careful facade crumbling. David approached me in the hallway, his face a mixture of panic and rage. "Mom, you don't understand what you're doing. We were trying to protect you. This is going to destroy the whole family." I looked at this man I'd raised, this person who'd called me Mom for 48 years, and I felt nothing but sadness. "David," I said quietly, "you destroyed this family the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. Within 2 weeks, the charges against me were dropped, and new charges were filed against all 3 of my children. The evidence Patricia had helped me organize was overwhelming, and when faced with the prospect of federal prison time, they began turning on each other. But the real drama was just beginning. David, true to form, tried to negotiate a deal first. He contacted Patricia's office, claiming he wanted to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. What he didn't know was that Patricia had advised me to record any conversations with my children, and I'd been documenting everything. When David called me directly, trying to convince me to work something out as a family, I let him talk while my new digital recorder captured every word. "Mom, this has gotten way out of hand," he said, his voice shaking. "We never meant for you to get in trouble. We were just trying to make better use of your money, you know? You weren't investing it properly, and we thought... You thought you'd... steal it," I interrupted. "It's not stealing when it's family money," he replied, and I could hear the entitlement in his voice even as he was facing federal charges. That money was going to be ours eventually anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline. Susan's approach was different. She showed up at my door one evening, tears streaming down her face, begging for forgiveness. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was all David's idea. He convinced Michael and me that you were getting too old to handle your finances properly. He said we were protecting you, but..." Even as she apologized, I could hear the manipulation in her words. She was trying to position herself as the innocent victim, led astray by her older brother, Susan. I said calmly, "I have recordings of you planning this scheme. I heard you laugh about how easy it would be to have me declared incompetent." Her tears dried up instantly. "You were recording us. I was protecting myself," I replied. "Something you taught me I needed to do." Michael took a different approach entirely. He hired his own lawyer and began publicly claiming that I was the mastermind who had manipulated them into participating. In the fraud, his attorney released a statement claiming that I had used my children's love and trust against them, and that they were victims of elder manipulation and coercion. The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing my money, framing me for their crimes, and trying to have me declared incompetent, he was now claiming that I had somehow coerced them into committing federal crimes. The media attention was intense. Local news stations picked up the story of the grandmother who'd outsmarted her criminal children, and suddenly I was getting calls from reporters, documentary filmmakers, and true crime podcasters. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel to know that your own children tried to frame you for their crimes?" one reporter asked. I thought about it for a moment. "It feels like I raised strangers," I finally said. "The children I thought I knew would never have done something like this." The trial became a media sensation. Courtroom artists drew sketches of me sitting composed at the defendant's table while my children squirmed in the gallery. Legal experts debated the case on television, discussing the growing problem of reverse elder abuse, where adult children exploit their elderly parents. But the most satisfying moment came when Patricia played the audio recordings in court. The jury listened as my children planned their scheme, laughed about my supposed incompetence, and discussed the best ways to manipulate me. You could see the exact moment when the jury's sympathy shifted. These weren't loving children concerned about their mother's welfare. These were calculating adults who saw their elderly mother as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial goals. David tried to claim the recordings were taken out of context. Susan's lawyer argued that she'd been coerced by her brothers. Michael maintained that he was the victim of elder manipulation. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, and too damning. David was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Susan received 6 years, and Michael got 4 years, plus probation. They were also ordered to pay restitution, not just to me, but to the other victims they'd defrauded. I recovered most of my money, though some of it was lost in the cryptocurrency collapse that ultimately exposed their scheme. More importantly, I recovered something I thought I'd lost forever: my sense of self-worth and my faith in my own judgment. The house feels different now, quieter but not lonely. I've started volunteering with a program that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial fraud. I share my story, and I listen to others who've been through similar betrayals. The hardest part isn't the money they stole. It's grieving the children I thought I had raised. I mourn the relationships that will never be repaired, the grandchildren who may never really know their grandmother, the family gatherings that will never happen again. But I've also discovered something powerful. At 72 years old, I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I survived the worst betrayal possible and came out fighting. My phone rings sometimes. Collect calls from the correctional facility where David is serving his sentence. I don't answer them. I've said everything I needed to say in court. People ask me if I'll ever forgive them. Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting someone who has proven they can't be trusted. What I've learned is that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love. The people who truly care about you don't see you as an asset to be managed, or an obstacle to be removed. They see you as a human being worthy of dignity, regardless of your age or bank account. To anyone listening who might be going through something similar, you are not helpless. You are not too old to fight back. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And don't let anyone, not even family, convince you that you're too confused or too weak to stand up for yourself. Your life and your dignity are worth defending. No matter what anyone else says, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know they're not alone.